Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. Kieran, I believe you're in Liverpool University as we talk because you've been so busy this week. I don't know why, but things have been happening.
Yes, I'm presently in my office at the uni. I was coming up on Monday morning, expecting a quiet week. There didn't seem to be any huge stories breaking, and then suddenly my phone started buzzing, and yes, it went into overdrive to such an extent that the Baroness now refers to me as Romesh, because the only time she ever sees me is on television or radio.
I like the fact you're the football finance world's equivalent of Romesh Ranganathan, which might make me Romesh's mum. Really? Yeah, that's fine. I'll take that. And yes, let's go back to Monday morning, Kieran. Sometimes we like to introduce our news stories with me doing a little sort of postmodern hint at what it may be and you telling the world what the story is, but we know what the big story is. Before we start though, Kieran, I want to point out that I and you fully understand why Man City fans are so defensive and angry this week. I've listened to a lot of radio, watched a lot of TV. If this was happening to Palace and Brighton, Kieran, you and I would be defensive and angry. I think City fans detect some glee from some media people about what's going on. We don't want to do that. We just want to talk about the story as dispassionately as possible and accept as well that these are accusations which Man City deny. But it's a huge story. But it's a huge story, Kieran, that you can only describe it. It dribbled out on Monday morning. It wasn't leaked. It wasn't announced. It wasn't even the top story on the Premier League's website. And we understand that Man City were informed at the same time of this story dribbled out. Is there anything significant in the way it was even announced?
I think there's a couple of issues to pick up from the way that it was announced. When we have seen other clubs being accused of financial fair play breaches, normally what has happened is that the EFL and the club say, look, there's an issue here. The EFL say, we are going to put out a press release, and the club, because it's been informed, will put out a press release at the same time. They tend to be very corporate. They tend to be very anodyne, very factual. But what happened here is intriguing in terms of the timing for two reasons. Yeah, we just spent a weekend where Everton had beaten Arsenal, which had got Manchester City fans excited because they could have reduced the lead in the Premier League to 2 points. And then Manchester City got it wrong, and they lost at Spurs to Harry Kane's record goal. So, it looked like it was just going to be a fairly dull morning. And then the Premier League made an announcement, and it was picked up by a couple of journalists. I think Martin Ziegler of the Times was one of the first to spot this, and he put it out, and the whole story exploded. But what Manchester City are absolutely livid about is that the Premier League didn't have the common courtesy to advise them that this is what we're doing. Now, why is that? Is it that the relationship between the two parties had deteriorated to such an extent that the Premier League wanted to have a bit of one-upmanship here? Is it because they feared if they had advised Manchester City in advance that Manchester City would have tried to secure every single law firm in London and made, therefore, the Premier League's position more complicated? And why did it suddenly come out 2 days before the government's white paper in respect of football regulation, in respect of football governance, and a white paper which has been vehemently opposed by the Premier League from day one, was due to be published? And irony of irony, of the big 6 clubs, the only one that has said, actually, we're in favour of an independent regulator is Manchester City. So there's far more to this than it just being a prosecution in respect of a breach of financial rules. There's a lot of party politics involved. We saw the Institute of Economic Affairs, who were involved allegedly, 55 Tufton Street. They were behind the Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng economic experiment last year. That they've started putting out articles trying to knock back and discredit the proposals. And why would a right-wing think tank ever want to get involved in the football industry? So are they being used as de facto lobbyists by the Premier League? Who else is being used as a lobbyist? It's all very curious, and it is not very transparent from the side of the Premier League. One press release, nothing more said, and as you rightly said, it sort of dribbled out on the Premier League's own website. So Manchester City had a quick look at it. They put out their response, which I think is fair to say was feisty. They've effectively said, "Bring it on," and it's going to be an intriguing set of affairs, which is going to take a long time. Our friend Nick DeMarco has said in the Times today could take between 2 to 4 years. So it's going to be complicated. There'll be a complete news blackout. I don't think either side will be briefing journalists during the course of events. But the timing, strange, Machiavellian, makes you feel uneasy. And if anything, strengthens the case for an independent regulator if this is the type of behaviour when we've got self-regulation operating in the industry.
Well, I'm kind of glad to hear you say that, Kieran, because you've sort of preempted my next point, as I want to talk a little bit more about the timing before we talk about the details of the charges. As it happened, the white paper on the football fan-led review was postponed because of the cabinet reshuffle anyway. But many people, you were on a show with Nicky Campbell on 5 Live very soon after the news broke, and again they were jumping to the same conclusion there, that this is the Premier League preempting the call for an independent regulator by saying, look, we're quite capable of looking after our own business. But waiting 11, 12 years to do so, which is essentially what they've done, indicates to me it strengthens the case for an independent regulator, rather than saying that the Premier League are able to look after their own affairs, because clearly they're not, certainly not in a timescale. So that, I thought that was an interesting one. And again, as you say, it makes Man City seem like a political football, isn't it?
You're absolutely right. I mean, if you create a spreadsheet of Manchester City's financial affairs, and I just happen to have one in front of me, if I was a regulatory body and I saw that one of the member clubs had tripled its commercial income in 2012 from 40 to 120 million pounds, I think my eyebrows may have been twitching a bit, and I'd have been investigating then. But what it appears to be the case is the Premier League said, we're just going to sit on our hands. We're not going to get involved. And it only started to get involved after the hacking in respect of the Portuguese hacker. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing or a good thing. I'm the curious part of me. I think hacking is quite good if it holds parties to account. So I've got no issue with the hacking itself. But the Premier League didn't start the investigation till 2018. It's now 2023. The investigation has taken longer than World War One. When you put it in that context, it, again, doesn't reflect particularly well as far as the Premier League is concerned. Now, the Premier League will say, well, hold on, if you take a look at the charges, some of the charges are that Manchester City deliberately obfuscated, delayed, and tried to make things as awkward as possible. And you read the charges, and I've read all 115 of them, and And it does paint a fairly vulgar picture in respect of what the Premier League thinks of Manchester City. But then you also think, well, hold on. When I last checked, Manchester City were A, a member of the Premier League, B, they are a shareholder of the Premier League, and C, they're the champions of the Premier League in 4 years out of the last 5. So it just seems very strange and clearly a breakdown in the relationship. We're fully aware that other Premier League clubs have been lobbying the Premier League in respect of they think that there's something up with Manchester City. We saw, there was a letter which when Manchester City were given a 2-year ban by UEFA, I think it was 8 or 9 clubs effectively wrote to the Premier League and say, get the champagne corks out. This is fantastic news, which I'm all for rivalry, but that seemed a bit insidious. So, the timing doesn't fit. If they say that this goes back to 2008, 2009, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But why did it take them the best part of the decade? Why did it take a Portuguese hacker to effectively, and Der Spiegel in Germany with the football leagues, for the Premier League to get its arse into gear?
You're confusing me with this talk of a Portuguese hacker, Kieran, because I keep thinking of rugby. I can't help thinking that a Portuguese hacker would be slightly less fierce than the traditional New Zealand hacker. But before we talk about some of the specific charges, there's one more general question I'd like to ask you, Kieran. And then we'd like to get on to what you think will happen with this committee and afterwards. We spoke about Juventus and the 15-point penalty deduction recently. And we did so in the kind of superior tone that English people often take when talking about some of these wacky comments. You just go, "Oh, well, it's Italy. What do you expect? That's how they roll over there. They take these, But you talked as well about the impact it would have on the reputation of Italian football in general. Is it going to be a similar impact? I mean, of course, we're not going to anticipate the outcome of this, but will there be people around the world, will there be broadcasters thinking, well, this could impact on the credibility of English football as a whole?
I'm not so certain. And the reason why I say that is that if you take a look at the Tour de France following the Lance Armstrong debacle, if you take a look at golf in terms of the post-Tiger Woods era, there's still a lot of interest in the sport as a whole. And when it comes to football, I think what sets football apart from many individual sports is that football is tribal. It is about rivalry. It is about getting one over on other teams. We've got Palace versus Brighton this weekend, and that's all that matters on Saturday. Doesn't matter how crap you play, so long as you get a result. So I think the world of football is actually quite short term. If you take a look at American franchise sports and you look at the non-stop scandals when it comes to behavioural issues in, well, especially the NFL with regards to drugs, and there's some pretty. I'd encourage people to listen to the occasional episode of Crime in Sports to see. You go, blimey, O'Reilly, that is staggering, and the sport continues. So I don't think that there'll be any significant reputational damage. The next FIFA World Cup is going to be a success. And we've just had 2 in Russia and Qatar where there were question marks. There's the potential for one of the next World Cups to be awarded for an unusual consortium of countries. Football makes people forget about life. And that's one of the great things about it. And I don't think the Premier League will have to worry about broadcasters or fans in Asia, in Africa, in Americas and so on, saying, we're going to switch away from the Premier League. We're going to watch the Bundesliga instead because we feel it's a more ethical sport, because we've got that brand loyalty with the way that we support our clubs. And sometimes when our clubs don't behave in a great way, it's a bit like when your child misbehaves. You're not happy with them in the moment, but deep down you still love them.
Yeah. Sorry, I had to think about that. No, of course, Kieran, you're absolutely right. It's not just this week the Palace Brighton game mattered, Kieran. Since the day after Boxing Day, pretty much, the Palace Brighton game's been mattering. You, Kieran, as you say, have read all 100 plus charges against Man City. I doubt very much if any of us have done the same thing or wanted to go through them all now. But I think we could sum them up as But what are the main? Can you see the main charges against Man City?
Yes, I think we can reduce the charges down to three broad areas. First of all, Manchester City artificially inflated its income. So that's the first allegation. That's the first series of charges. And let's just go back to financial fair play. Financial fair play says that you can lose £105 million over 3 years. Well, what is a profit or a loss? It's income less costs. So therefore, if you inflate your costs, this is the first accusation, that's going to help you stay within the limits. In respect of Manchester City, it's a case of the accusers saying that Manchester City has received money from the club owners, which under normal circumstances would not count towards FFP, but they've disguised it as sponsorship income from companies related directly or indirectly to the club owners. So therefore, it's been effectively being able to claim that they've got commercial income when actually it was owners' income, and owners' income wouldn't have counted towards the FFP calculations. The second issue, and I think we were actually talking about this on one of the shows in the last 7 days, it's all about parallel or phantom contracts.
Yeah.
Now, in the case of Manchester City, what the allegation is that when Roberto Mancini was manager, Manchester City were paying him through the books £1.45 million a year. But in addition to this, he had a contract to be a consultant stroke coach for a club in UAE, in Abu Dhabi. And he was getting £1.75 million a year for that particular job, which involved 4 days' work. So if that is the case, then according to the Premier League, Manchester City are deflating their costs and increasing their income. But you and I, we both remember one of the jolly japes in terms of the stories we had on this show was when an EFL club was paying a player's mum $700,000 a year to be an academy scout. And there were no repercussions, there were no charges in respect of that in the form of financial fair play. So, yes, these charges are serious. How much are we talking about in total? I genuinely don't know. The third accusation, and I think this, if it is true, it doesn't reflect well on the parties, but the Premier League has said Manchester City has just been awkward. They've delayed, they've obfuscated, they've used tactics to stifle the progress of the investigation, and therefore they've made that more difficult. That was also an accusation that was made by UEFA against Manchester City. And indeed, Manchester City, whilst they were cleared of the charges with regards to financial fair play from UEFA, did end up having to pay a €10 million fine for delaying tactics. Now, Manchester City claimed at the time, well, the reason why they started to get awkward was because, in their opinion, UEFA were leaking titbits to pet journalists to try to put forward the case against Manchester City. So City said, well, if you're not going to act in a manner, i.e. we keep it all behind closed doors, then we're going to turn on the awkward step and make things as difficult as we can for you. So those are the three broad charges. And the Premier League is alleging that this took place over a 9-year period. And if that is the case, and these charges are proven, then I think it makes the board of Manchester City, their positions completely untenable, because it's effectively saying that Manchester City's board of directors or executive staff have deliberately entered into a process of trying to misrepresent the accounts in order to comply with financial fair play and therefore gain an advantage against other clubs in the division.
You mentioned UEFA, Kieran. Is there any overlap between these charges and UEFA's charges, or are these Premier League charges completely separate from what UEFA were claiming Man City did?
That they are independent. The Premier League's investigation has been independent. There are a couple of differences which I think we need to be aware of. First of all, in the case of UEFA was effectively the investigator, the prosecutor, and the judge.
Right.
Now, that normally makes you feel pretty uncomfortable. If that was in any other walk of life, if that was in another geographical jurisdiction, you'd say, well, it sounds like a kangaroo court. In the respect of the Premier League is the investigator, but there is an independent commission who will be gathering the evidence or will be listening to the representations of both the Premier League's legal team and Manchester City's legal team, and then reflecting and making a judgment. So I think there are some differences. Secondly, in terms of timing, the Premier League's accusations go back to 2009. Now, UEFA is limited under its own constitution to 5 years in terms of evidence. So UEFA couldn't go back when the case was brought further than 5 years. So there is no time bar as far as the Premier League is concerned. So that's why there are so many charges relating to individual seasons which are more than 5 years old. Also, in respect of sort of a slight difference, if you take a look at the Premier League handbook, which I suspect has been one of the most downloaded products on the internet over the course of the last 48 hours, I refer people to the 22-23 handbook and Rule W80. And Rule W80 intriguingly says, in the case of an independent commission, it does not matter where the evidence comes from, provided it is relevant. Now, why is that important? Well, some of the evidence we don't know what evidence the Premier League has seen, some of the evidence may have come from the hacker. Now, in terms of what happened with Manchester City and UEFA did present this evidence, but Manchester City's lawyers were able to attack it from saying, well, it's not contextualised. You might only be seeing one half of an email, and we don't necessarily admit that our client sent the emails as well. So I think that there are a few differences. They're not huge, but I think the statute of limitations issue does strengthen the position of the Premier League and weakens the position of City compared to where we were with UEFA.
I don't know if Pornhub even has an office, Kieran, but I quite like the idea that for the last 3 days they've been sitting in the office going, no one's downloading any porn. Here's what? Yeah, they're all on the Premier League website downloading the rules. Okay. So what happens now? The 3-person committee that will be investigating the evidence from both sides, they will come from where, Kieran? Are these all independent people? Will there be one from the Premier League? Or are they all business people, accountants, financial experts, etc.?
I believe that there is a King's Counsel who is effectively heading up the commission, who won't necessarily appoint himself to be on the judgment panel, but there's likely to be somebody from a finance background, because I know Derby County fans, for example, one of the things which made them really cross when they were up before a commission in respect of accusations in respect of financial fair play, they said there wasn't anybody with a finance background, in their opinion, that was forming a judgment. So I think there's likely to be somebody from a financial background with an understanding of football affairs and how things work. There's likely to be somebody from a legal background as well who is well versed in what constitutes more reliable and less reliable evidence, and probably another. I probably suspect there'll be two lawyers and an accountant or something like that. People, and they will be very highly regarded individuals because this is a flagship case. I said that I felt that if Manchester City lose the case, that means that the board of directors have no validity. They've got no credibility. Exactly the same would be the case in respect of Manchester City successfully defending themselves, because it then looks as if the Premier League have brought this prosecution for two reasons. A, because Manchester City aren't popular with some of the other bigger clubs in the Premier League, because Manchester City keep winning the Premier League. And B, it's effectively, is it a spurious case brought by the Premier League? Because they're just trying to prove to the outside world self-regulation works, and therefore it's a case of we can therefore disregard the recommendations of the Crouch Report and the calls for an independent regulator.
I believe the KC, who's been put in charge of setting up the commission, has admitted that he's an Arsenal fan, so that's probably a reason why he may not take part in it. Before I ask you, Kieran, we do have a lot of other big news stories that I want to cover. Before I ask you about possible outcomes, one of the things that a lot of Man City fans have said, and indeed some Man City journalists, is that they simply don't believe that had Liverpool or Manchester United been accused of these charges, that the Premier League would have taken them on. They feel that Man City are not considered to be a club with a huge global brand, and therefore are not a safe target, but are a target that the Premier League can attack without the sort of, they've been getting a lot of stick from City fans, and understandably so. But is there anything in that, Kieran, or is that just the understandable lashing out of Man City fans?
Well, you can understand City fans feeling defensive. The Premier League effectively did very, very little, stroke absolutely nothing in regard of those clubs who tried to take over the domestic game and to reduce it to a 16 or 18 team league, to have votes reduced in such a way that it would only need 6 votes for football rules to go through. And that was designed by Manchester United. Now, we've also got the Super League clubs, of which Manchester City were one, and I'm not saying that they are innocent in that, but they certainly weren't the drivers in respect of Super League. So if the Premier League is going to say, well, those clubs that are involved in Super League and Big Picture, which was effectively an attempt to transfer control of the game to the likes of the Glazers and John Henry, if that's not going to result in any charges, why is it that Manchester City are being used as a scapegoat? And I can see that if I was a City fan, I might take that view on board. At the same time, if these charges are proved to be correct, it reflects really badly on the board of directors of Manchester City. And I think we've always said you separate fans from club owners, because they don't share the same culture. You've only, I work in the city of Liverpool. I listen to people, from the likes of the Spirit of Shankly, who, the people sort of make you really proud to be football fans because they get it, and the owners clearly don't get it. This is as much to do with business. This is as much to do with, if Manchester City get a severe penalty, then it reduces the number of sides who are competing for the top 4 places in the Premier League and the rewards of competing in the Champions League. And therefore, the other clubs have a vested interest for Manchester City, first of all, to be prosecuted by the Premier League. Secondly, to be weakened, because if this case does take 2 to 4 years, as Nick DeMarco has been quoted in the Times, then if you're a high quality footballer, do you want to come to the Etihad with that threat hanging over you? So there is a lot going on here. It's what we've seen is the bit of the iceberg that's floating on top of the water. What we're not seeing necessarily is the mass beast below it.
Yeah, and plus as well, I suppose it's more difficult for City to attract players when Guardiola has said publicly that if it turns out he has been lied to and these things did happen, he would leave the club straight away. So that's an extra problem for City and their fans. In terms of potential outcomes, Kieran, it seems to me, you watch TV, you listen to the radio, the whole gamut of potential outcomes has been discussed. It seems to me, if I was a lawyer, if I was a City fan, I would be arguing that if it was proven beyond any doubt that some people at the club had misrepresented accounts, you still can't prove that that has influenced football outcomes on the pitch. You can't prove that Man City won those titles because of that extra financial benefit, it seems to me. We've got the precedent of, for example, Sheffield United suing West Ham because of the Tevez thing. We've got people saying, well, points deductions, will they be ahead or past? And of course, everyone's saying that financial implications are completely pointless. So with your serious financial hat on, Kieran, what do you think, assuming that the outcome is that the Premier League win their case, for want of a better word, what do you think the most likely outcome is, or is it possible to predict that now?
I think if there is a successful prosecution in respect of the Premier League's accusations against Manchester City, the most likely outcome will be A, a financial penalty, which everybody will disregard, and B, there is likely to be a sizable points deduction. Now, how do you work out an appropriate level of points deduction? If you take a look at the EFL, the great thing that we got from the EFL when Birmingham City had a points deduction was there's actually a known tariff. There's no such tariff here. And indeed, we don't even know by how much, if any, Manchester City would have exceeded the financial fair play limits if these cases are proven and therefore that they had disguised ownership investment and the wages hadn't had wages being paid directly by Manchester City. So my gut feeling is that if there is a successful prosecution, there would have to be some on-field repercussions. Right. And therefore a points deduction, yes. Stripping of historic titles, no, because I think you're absolutely right with reference to the Tevez case. Sheffield United were not reinstated, West Ham were not relegated. The fans of Manchester United and Liverpool will be creating some form of asterisk campaign in relation to Manchester City's achievements in winning the Premier League, because I think if we look at it, it would potentially result in 2 titles for Liverpool and 2 titles for Manchester United. So from a tribal point of view, the court of Twitter will get itself into a frenzy. But in reality, I think a historic realignment won't take place. It's not the same. It's not as simple as when we see in the Olympics when somebody finishes 4th, but one of the top 3 is subsequently found to have been using drugs, because we know that drugs are performance enhancing. Manchester City, they might have got some extra money and they might have spent it on a crap player who actually made them worse rather than better. And I think that's very, very difficult. In terms of demotion to another division, Juventus have been demoted. Rangers have been demoted historically, but those were for more complex issues. Rangers went into liquidation. That was so. There's no indication that would be the case at Manchester City. Manchester City's owners. The irony is that the club is not in any financial distress. So I think, if anything, it would probably have to be a points deduction if all of these charges, or all of the serious charges, are proven, because otherwise, I think the other clubs in the Premier League say, well, what's the point of giving one of the clubs with the richest owners, or second richest owners now, probably after that of Newcastle. What's the point of giving them a financial penalty? That they won't notice it, and therefore it will have to be something which is noticed by the football community on a broader sphere.
And finally, Kieran, this underlines everything you've said about football since our very first pod, that clubs act out of self-interest, and there will be 6 other clubs in the Premier League at the top end who will be going, yep, throw Man City out, because then we've got a better chance of getting in the Champions League. And there will be Palace fans and clubs around us who have no personal animus against Man City at all, going, yep, throw them out of the Premier League this season because that's one less club to be relegated, because that's how the rest of us work. For all the anger and angst and worry and fear of Man City fans, understandably, the rest of us are only really interested in what happens to our club.
You're absolutely right. And I think those fans who want it sorted this season, and I know that some clubs want it sorted this season for exactly that reason. I don't think this is going nowhere fast as far as a decision is concerned. And again, Brighton are 6th in the Premier League. If Manchester City got a 25-point penalty, then potentially we're 5th. Yes, all of a sudden we're thinking, holy moly, we could end up in the Champions League.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's going to be the case, because how soon is now when it comes to making this decision, and I just don't see it as being a quick and easy process, because if you've got 115 accusations, then you have to have the time to put together 115 defences.
I was going to say, Kieran, I'm disappointed in you for turning it round to Brighton at the end, making it all about Brighton at the end. But then you slipped in another Smiths song title, so you're back in the good books. This episode of The Price of Football is brought to you by Football 360, a brand new online course on football business and finance, brought to you by our very own Kieran Maguire. Kieran, as you're here, tell us more.
Well, indeed, I am here, and Football 360, it's designed for football business professionals. Or you could be a career starter, or you could be a football finance nerd. That's how I started, and it covers everything from understanding the club financial statements to valuations, financial fair play, and so on. It's delivered in bite-sized chunks. They're 15 minutes long. They're on-demand video lessons, so you watch them when you want to. And then, slightly embarrassingly, it features me. But we've also got some industry experts, people who really know what they're talking about. And there'll be networking sessions so you can experience for yourself the unbridled joy of me talking to you about my latest spreadsheet. And if you're very, very lucky, I might mention amortization.
Oh, and if you're very, very, very lucky, there may also be a module from me in creative eyebrow raising. Go to football360.online. That's football360.online to sign up now for the very special launch price of just £149. That's football360 or 360 if you prefer .online, where you can sign up to this fabulous course for just £149. You will learn a lot. Our next news story, Kieran, is about another mega wealthy Premier League club. And I suspect if Man City fans, I beg your pardon, if Man City fans have got a cup of tea to their lips at the moment, they might be spitting that tea out. And he said, because it's almost, it's sometimes, at the moment, if you're a satirist working on a high-profile TV satire show, things are getting quite difficult because politicians are doing a very good job of satirising themselves. And this next story is almost in that category.
Yes. Now, I take this story with a pinch of salt, and I'm not saying this because it's in the Mail, given that I now write for the Daily Mail. But And I know you're disappointed in
Did
me.
I make that big enough sign?
Yeah, I think, does that make me unlovable? I don't know.
No, Kieran, nothing can make you unlovable.
Yes, this is a claim in the Mail that the Chelsea owners, after a record spend in the transfer market in the last two windows, are now going to make a proposition to the Premier League that they should be treated as a special case for financial fair play purposes because the club's assets were frozen when Roman Abramovich was linked to the Putin regime, and therefore the government froze all of his assets, with the one exception that Chelsea were allowed to trade, but Chelsea were not allowed to generate income. So they weren't allowed to sell tickets. The merchandise, the mega store was closed. The government, I think, made a sensible decision and said, look, you can serve catering because you can't expect people to be locked up in a football stadium for 2-3 hours and have no access to food or drink. So if this story is true, then Chelsea are saying that they have been discriminated against because the former owner last season, his behaviour by being connected to Putin resulted in the club not being able to sell tickets and not being able to sell merchandise, and therefore they should have an additional allowance when it comes to the financial fair play calculations. I think the word is chutzpah that would be used here, because everybody was going, well, if that is the case, why didn't you just sort of taper down your spending in summer 22 and in winter 23? And if they are successful, and clearly this is another reason why perhaps we need a regulator, because whatever happens, the chances are we won't hear anything from the Premier League. Because if they put this through on the nod, we're going to give Chelsea an extra £10 million allowance. Well, how are we going to know as fans? And if they do that, then effectively it completely destroys the position against Manchester City, because they would appear to be giving one club a bit of a leg up whilst trying to keep another one in its place.
I'm not an expert in PR, Kieran, but surely somebody at the Premier League will be going, not this week. I think definitely don't nod it through this week. You could understand Chelsea. If Chelsea had only spent £5 million and said, well, we only had that to spend, you could kind of understand it. But on the back of spending 300 Brazilian, it's a lot. 3 stories now, Kieran, about potential changes of club owners. The first one, if you're a Charlton Athletic fan, this is definitely labelled under the file, wasn't it?
Yes. The story, which, again, I'm not quite sure how much this is a briefing from some of the people close to the deal is concerned. I think Charlton, and I appreciate as a Palace fan, Charlton's not your favourite football club, but again, separate fans from football clubs.
Well, no, Kieran. Really, they're sort of down there with Millwall somewhere. I'm aware of their postcode. It's similar to ours, but it's Brighton, Kieran. In fact, exactly.
They must have stepped on a black cat at some point, because they had Roland Duchâtelet, who there was, and again, I like the cut of Charlton fans' jib. When they protest, it's throwing plastic pigs onto the pitch and just doing the stuff which gets attention and gets a story into the media and so on. So
they started their own political party as well, didn't they? To get back to the Valley, which was an amazing campaign.
Yeah, and this is again reasons to be proud of football fans. We're not the morons we're set out to be. We are imaginative. We are funny. We can use terrace humour and articulate ourselves in a way which many people do not give football fans credit for. So they had Roland Duchâtelet. He eventually went, and he was replaced with is it Thomas Sandgaard?
Yeah.
who was or is an American investor. He likes to paint himself as rock and roll, and let's say it. We invited him twice onto the Price of Football podcast.
Yeah.
You and I both sat there waiting, and the sod didn't turn up on both occasions. So he's not in my good books. He could be a bit rock and roll. He could be a handsome devil if he really cares to be. But in my books, he's not great, and I don't think he's made the progress he wanted to with Charlton. And there is a case, when a new owner comes in, if the old owner had been disliked, immediately you get that bounce, because the first thing that Thomas Sangaka say is, I'm not Roland de Chachelet. Yeah. So therefore, people go, well, hey. And then it could be a case of, but I'm not actually a whole lot better. So I think relationships between the Charlton fan base and the current owner have deteriorated. So therefore, is there somebody about to walk in? Now, if that person was known for wearing salmon-coloured chinos, then it can only be one man, and that's Charlie Methven, formerly at Charlton. Formerly at Sunderland, and made quite famous during the Sunderland Till I Die. Now, we said a couple of weeks ago that Charlie did actually send us a 10-page email saying that I'd been rude about him.
Yeah, sent you a 10-page email, Kieran.
Well, he sent it to questions at Price of Football. Now, we both know that means if you send something to questions at Price of Football, it takes producer guy about 9 months to wade through the backlog. So in terms of Charlie Methven, let's just take a look at what happened. He and Donald acquired a club that is the only club in the history of the EFL to have 2 years' worth of parachute payments and have the biggest attendances in League One, and on both occasions failed to get out of League One. Mm. So he put together a very passionate case, did Charlie, in respect of his achievements at Charlton. Achievements at Sunderland. I'm not convinced. He called the fans parasites.
Yeah.
Now, if I was running a nightclub, if I was running a grocery store, I wouldn't go around calling my customers parasites. Football fans are many things. We can look at things through a lens which is distorted by our affection for the club, but we ain't parasites. We're not sucking the blood out of the club. We are the lunatics that go from Sunderland to Southend on a Tuesday night in numbers and support the team, and then the team lose, and you have to get home at 4:00 in the morning, and you still turn up for work the following morning. And as much as you are hacked off with the performance that night, we all know on the Saturday you'll still be there. So to call football fans parasites, and yes, I appreciate he did withdraw the comment at a later point, but that was only under pressure. So he is being connected with an acquisition of Charlton Athletic. He's not doing it because he's a Charlton Athletic fan. His motivations, if to paraphrase some of what he said in the email to us, I'm entitled to make some money from this. You are absolutely right. You are entitled to make some money if you're an investor. But here's a suggestion. Why don't you go and find another industry? Why don't you go and find an industry which does not involve the passion, the thoughts, the affection of people who are football fans? Because we don't get you and you don't get us.
Yeah, to paraphrase that, go and annoy someone else, Charlie, basically.
Yes.
Whatever I feel about that, Charlton are rivals to Palace, of course they are, but that club and those fans deserve better than Charlie Methven, let's be fair. And well done for slipping in Handsome Devil. That's 2 Smith songs so far, Kieran.
It's actually 5.
Is it? Have I missed a couple?
Yes.
Well, I'm not going to listen to the pod, so I'll have to ask you afterwards. So, Sheffield United are doing well off the pitch, and big developments on the pitch. Oh, other way around, on the pitch and off the pitch. Yeah.
Yes. So yes, they've made progress in the FA Cup. They are doing extremely well in the Championship as well, and there's been talk about a takeover from, and apologies if I get his name right, from Dozie Obusi. And then, and credit to the people like Joey Durso and Matt Slater and some of the other journalists who have been doing a bit of digging. And as always, Companies House becomes our friend. Dozie Umobosi claims to be a Nigerian billionaire and owns Tingo Airlines.
Yeah.
And says, I'm looking for a license to fly from Nigeria to the UK. Now, what I don't want to do is to fall into stereotypes of, we all have in our spam folder emails from Nigerian princes are saying, I've just got an awful lot of money. Could I put it into your bank account? Please send me your bank details. So I don't want to go down into that particular route. But if we take a look at Tingo Airlines, which appears to be the source of his wealth, he says it's £1 billion company. And so I go, okay, let's pop along to Companies House. And if we go to Companies House, well, indeed, Tingo Airlines does have £1 billion worth of shares. So you think, well, he's put £1 billion in. Well, I wonder to myself, what could be the amount of shares that have not been paid for? And purely by coincidence, it's £1 billion. So he's issued £1 billion of shares, so therefore he should have put the money in. But it also says in the accounts, this is the amount of money we've not yet received, which is also £1 billion. And then Companies House also says that the address to which Tingo Airlines is registered is a false address. It's effectively, they've sent out letters which have come back with not known at this property. So therefore, they've now said, well, we're going to have to give Companies House own address as the home of Tingo Airlines. So it's therefore, Companies House has set up a striking off order in respect of Tingo Airlines. Tingo Airlines, I think, does have an Instagram page, but when you go to that and you take a look at the picture of the aircraft, which has Tingo Airlines, should we say that it looks as if that picture might have been interfered with? And the word Tingo Airlines is effectively somebody's gone along with a bit of Tipex, crossed out the name of another company and written in crayon, Tingo Airlines. And you go, this just looks extremely concerning. Now, here, the EFL will have hopefully done their due diligence. And I've got to say, in my experience and observation, the EFL has really upped their game. This will be a classic case of let's see whether the owners and directors test is as watertight as we would want it to be, because it doesn't look great in terms of Mr. Umwozi's financial position. And I would be looking for far more transparency here, because he doesn't seem to have a big digital footprint. When you in terms of if somebody's worth £1 billion, they normally must have run a few companies to have got that far. And sometimes things are a bit opaque. Nobody quite knows how Roman Abramovich generated his wealth. But as far as this case is concerned, I have my suspicions.
I must admit, you've surprised me a little with the answer to that news story, Kieran, or the explanation of that news story, because although I say it does sort of illustrate our particular roles on this show, in that you do the actual deep financial research and I look at photos in the tabloids. Because when you look at the PR campaign, it looked like he's been at the training ground, he's been shaking hands with players. It looked like a done deal by a very wealthy man, but clearly, who knew that tabloid photos could be misleading?
Well, shades of Chris Kirchner, I would say.
Okay. This third takeover story, Kieran, it's about Morecambe. And the traction we've had on social media about this has been huge. And I'm not suggesting huge for a club like Morecambe, but we've been asked about this by so many people from so many clubs. And again, as an outsider, despite the relative youth of the potential new owner, it seems to me like a decent enough story, but it's clearly a great deal of concern from Morecambe fans that we're seeing, and they've been very keen to get your inside view on this.
Yes, and I think a high five has to be sent in the direction of Martin Calladine as well, who has written a fantastic book in respect of club ownership, and he is one of Twitter's Rottweilers when it comes to the background of these people. So he's done a lot of digging. And this is in respect of a gentleman called Sabjo Yahal. I hope he's pronounced his name correctly. And he's 20 years old. He appears to be from Edgbaston. Now, if I was 20 years old and a very rich individual from Edgbaston, I probably would be out enjoying myself, and I wouldn't be getting involved in a football club for which I've had no historic affection or involvement, a football club that's losing money, a football club whose fan base is devoted but not big, and therefore has probably the smallest budget in League One. Now, he said that he's willing to buy Morecambe FC. I think he's willing to pay. I think the price involved was 5 million. Which, speaking to people in the local press, there they say, well, it's about twice as much as we thought as anybody would pay for it. So, is it time to start pressing the panic button? Because what you then do is say, okay, well, what is his background? And he's involved with a company called Saab Capital. Now, if you read some of the press reports from when he first got involved, it looks as if people say, "Oh, this is a private equity firm," and the first thing you say, "Private equity? That sounds a bit professional. That sounds a bit sort of world of finance." But Saab Capital's website appears to have been taken down. Saab Capital was promising, because when I sort of do a bit of, you can use a bit of an internet time machine to find out what Saab Capital was like when it used to exist as a website, and it was proposing 35% returns in a week.
Wow!
Even my Uncle Terry, when he was offering some investment opportunities to little old ladies, he wasn't offering them 35% in a week. So it does sound a bit outlandish.
To be fair, Kieran, he wasn't actually offering either, really. An offer implies some kind of choice. But let's crack on.
That's true. Looking at LinkedIn, Saab Capital appears to have 4 employees. I don't know any private equity companies that only have 4 employees. They have to have compliance officers. They have to have people that are doing the investigations who to put the people with the private with the large sums of money looking after their money. So it just looks wrong. He also says that he's got a drinks brand which will have a value of £1 billion. Having a value at some point in the future of £1 billion is probably pushing it for a company which only appears to have one drinks product at present. So you put all of those things together, and it just doesn't look great.
Who are the current owners of Morecambe, Kieran, and what's their current financial situation? Is it such that they need or they want to offload the club?
I think they probably do. It's currently owned by the Bond Group. They also are the owners of Worcester Warriors, a rugby union club, which has gone into administration.
Yeah.
One of the people connected to the board group is a lawyer who was struck off for a period of time. And I've said before, I'm a chartered accountant. We are a professional body. We are normally very reluctant to stop our own members from practicing.
Yeah,
it's very much a job of last resort. So, to have people connected who have effectively been told by their own profession, you've gone too far, doesn't look great. So, where does this leave Morecambe? Because the club isn't making money. Does it mean it's curtains? Well, the one thing we know about football is never give up. There is a light that never goes out, and therefore, we have to keep the hope going.
Yeah. The other thing as well with the valuation, Kieran, and I noticed there is a light that never goes. In fact, you've got me so paranoid now. I think everything you say is actually Smith's a lyric or song title. A couple of the tabloids, put a higher value on Morecambe than £5-10 million because of the seaside location of the ground. Is that a worry that this young entrepreneur might be looking at that as a potential way of expanding his portfolio by buying the club and then selling the ground?
I'm always worried about the protection of football stadiums, and I've taught at Lancaster University on occasion, which is close to Morecambe, and I went along to a Tuesday night match in Morecambe. Delightful little ground, and it's quite a nice place on that part of Lancashire, which is in the northwest for any of our geographical observers.
Me, you mean, yeah.
Well, no, I said that Scunthorpe was by the sea. With global warming, perhaps I'm just ahead of my time. That's all I'm saying. Yes, I think the concern would be, is this somebody who's trying to buy the club and then leverages it by taking out mortgages on all the property assets and so on? That is pure speculation. I've got no evidence, and I'm not making any accusations. But it just doesn't. It doesn't pass the smell test. Having somebody from this location get involved in a football club at such a place.
For those worried Morecambe fans, Kieran, and as we know there are many of them, this is one of those things where us outsiders think, well, hopefully the EFL owners and directors test will flushing out and prevent that takeover happening. But at the same time, if that does happen, that could lead Morecambe in even more trouble, couldn't it?
Well, that's right, because if you've got owners who are not in a position to fund the club or are unwilling to fund the club, then it's all very well saying, well, we're not going to let the new owners in. And again, if we look at what happened with Bury, Steve Dale, reprehensible human being, but there was nobody else at the time willing to take over the club.
Yeah.
So, where does this leave you? And whilst we've nailed our colours to the mast of the independent regulator, this is an issue which does cause concern, because if an owner is unable or unwilling to fund losses at a club, can the regulator save the club? Unless there's some form of bond that you have to pay when you buy a football club, and that goes into a central fighting fund, you can see things getting quite unpleasant and difficult.
There is, though, I believe, Kieran, a potential hopeful benefactor for Morecambe. Tyson Fury has an interest in part of the training ground, I believe. Is that right?
Yes, I mean, I think he sponsors their shorts. He is local. I think there might be an element of wishful thinking. Tyson Fury is a professional athlete in his own right.
Yeah.
He has been very successful as a professional boxer. Doesn't necessarily make him a Morecambe football fan, and he lives a very modest lifestyle in the area, as people will probably testify. But is that a case of 2 + 2 = 5, and in the sense that he is Morecambe's most famous resident, with the exception of Eric Morecambe, who clearly is no longer with us.
Yeah. I'll say what I always say, Kieran. If a Nigerian tech billionaire who wants to buy Sheffield United, or a young lad entrepreneur who wants to buy Morecambe are listening, we'd only be too happy to hear your point of view, if there is one. But of course, I would. Do you know what? Wouldn't it be nice if the producer guy was to call us in the morning and say they've both been in touch, it's all fine, they genuinely want to buy the club and they're going to invest loads of money in it, but neither of us are holding our breath. Producer guy would forget to tell us anyway. Too busy polishing his gold phone. A couple more stories to get through, Kieran. Which is a euphemism for 5, but they're quite short.
I'll whiz through these.
The first 2 are about sponsorship deals, and they both involve sovereign nations.
Yes. The first one's in respect of Spurs. And this question, in fact, has developed, I think, whilst we've been recording this show.
Oh.
Spurs had a £42.5 million deal with the South African Tourist Board. And it was for matchday advertising, training camps, kit branding, to have the South African logo, on those perspex signs when Harry Kane gets interviewed after scoring another goal, and so on. And this provoked quite a lot of negativity back in South Africa. South Africa is going through a pretty tough time at present. There has been a failure of sovereign government, in my opinion. And I've visited South Africa and I've had a great time when I've ever gone there. But at present, there's power shortages, the water's not running at times, and there's been a lot of opposition. As soon as this deal was announced, people in South Africa said, why are you advertising our country when we turn on a tap and no water comes out? That's surely the government needs to focus on things at a local level rather than giving money to a football club. And this has been a similar accusation that was made in respect of Arsenal, who are connected to the Visit Rwanda campaign. Although Rwanda is less of a democratic institution than South Africa. So what we have seen today in the last couple of hours is that this deal appears to have been vetoed. The opposition to the government really kicked off about it, and I now read that, and this is the irony, the South African Tourism Committee has vetoed the South Africa Tourist Board in terms of giving £42.5 million to Spurs. So Spurs are having, they're not having the best of things at present when it comes to their commercial arm. This has been vetoed. The naming rights for White Hart Lane, which was supposed to have come through at the end of 2022, that's not materialised. It could be that they might have been negotiating with a crypto company, and we know that the crypto world has softened. Chelsea have lost their sleeve sponsor, and so on. So in terms of the commercial position, it's not gone as well as Spurs would have hoped for.
And the next sponsorship story, Kieran, again comes under the category of you can't satire an organisation that's satirising itself, basically. It concerns Saudi Arabia and the 2023 Women's World Cup.
Yes, this is a story which has been in the press. It appears that Saudi Arabia wants to be a sponsor of the Women's World Cup, which is taking place in Australia and New Zealand, I think this June, July. And FIFA are trying to get separate sponsors for the men's and the women's game. That's great. Yeah, that's. I think they are different products. I think they have different demographics. So therefore, having a different type of sponsor, you can see the benefit. But in respect of Saudi Arabia, it's not a country which has been historically linked with women's rights. There has been some progress. Women are now allowed to attend games, and you might be thinking, well, that's not, that does seem that that's not very much progress. I think there is now a women's football league, and I'm thinking, well, why is that the case? And then we also find, in respect of another story which has broken during this is clearly a long show, that it appears that Saudi Arabia wants to jointly host the 2030 World Cup with Greece and Egypt. We were aware of that story was doing the rounds, but it now seems that Saudi Arabia has said to the Greek government, hey guys, here's a deal. We will fund your stadiums to be built in order to comply with FIFA regulations for the 2030 World Cup, provided that 75% of matches take place in Saudi Arabia. So having three countries, offering to host the World Cup, you've got one which is based in Europe, we've got Egypt, North Africa. Is that? Am I getting that right? I'm getting into a geographical panic here. And then we've got Saudi Arabia itself, Middle East. Ultimately, the decision to give the hosting to a World Cup is done on a voting basis, and it could be that Greece will get European votes, Egypt will get some of the North African votes, and Saudi Arabia would get support of countries in the Middle East. So you can see from a geopolitical point of view why this might be attractive. But in respect of the World Cup, it has provoked a bit of a kickback from Australia and New Zealand. Their football associations, they say, well, we're the hosts. We've not been consulted about this. We don't feel particularly comfortable with regards to this. Does that mean that Gianni Infantino will listen? Time will tell.
We need to crack on and end this pod, Kieran, because if news keeps coming in while we're doing it, yes, we will never finish. It's going to be like that wonderful model railway scene in The Wrong Trousers, where the keeps putting railway track down and it keep going on. Our penultimate and our pre-penultimate story take us to North Wales. The first one, Kieran, I have to be very careful how I pronounce this, because this is the town in which Ali, my wonderful wife, was brought up. She's not here at the moment, otherwise she would have insisted on coming in to pronounce it properly, but she's left me various phonetic notes to say that this story is about Llandudno FC. And if you think my pronunciation of Llandudno FC is wrong, take it up with Ali. That's her. Is that Google Translate saying?
I don't know what it is. That's got me worried now. I think that's the university telling me I need to get out.
Stop using our electricity.
Yes, we've got a sustainable energy policy. Get out, Maguire.
It's 5 to 9 in the evening. What are you doing at work? Has she kicked him out again?
What's happened here in respect of Llandudno FC is, in October 2014, they have a 3G pitch, and that was deemed unsafe due to, I quote, a slight health and safety issue. But I think it's far more than that. It was installed in 2014 at a cost of £500,000, and they've not managed to play any matches since October. I think they're trying to play some matches in Bangor, but they've launched a GoFundMe campaign, because football in individual villages is something which in towns should be preserved. They've got a ground which has got a 2,000 capacity, so they get a decent number of fans turning up. So that's our first story from North Wales. And if I quickly leap across to a slightly more high-profile team from the area, we go to Wrexham. And Wrexham have entered a winner-takes-all competition in the United States, where the prize, and I think there's 4 teams, and I presume that it'll either be a round robin or it could be a knockout. The prize is $1 million, which for a club in the 5th tier of the pyramid is very sizable. Let's be honest. I think the owner factor, the brand of the owners, is a contributory factor here. But there's nothing wrong with taking advantage of the brand of McElhenney and Ryan Reynolds. And you go, okay, this looks good. And then you read, it's a 7-a-side tournament. And you go, I've done 5-a-side and 6-a-side, but I've never done 7-a-side. So I don't know what size the goal nets are. I don't know what the rules will be. And I think there's a curiosity factor. I think people will be turning up to the tournament partly due to the hope of seeing the owners of the football club, not necessarily the football club itself. But, power to their elbow if they do that, and if they are successful also in getting to the EFL. Things are going pretty well for Wrexham at present, and this could be another $1 million going into the coffers.
Well, the owners talked publicly this week about aiming for the Premier League, and this is yet another example of the potential return on their investment should they get that far. I mean, we saw their brilliant away support last night at Sheffield United. They played very, very well in 2 games against a team that are almost nominally a Premier League team. So that the potential is clearly huge at the Wrexham, Kieran, isn't it? And it's gone beyond being a novelty now, the Wrexham story. It seems like something that is actually does have proper foundations, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And I went along to a Clubs in Crisis match, a Fans United match in Wrexham, and I think that was around about 2004. And we did something similar at Brighton and Chester and other when clubs were going through some really tough times, and the hospitality of the Wrexham fans, I've never known such generosity. So I've got an affection for the club before they had the takeover. They were great fans, they were great fun, and I wish them all the best.
Yeah. Now, I'm aware, Kieran, as our listeners are, that this is a longer pod than normal. I'm slightly worried that some of our middle-aged listeners who listen to us in the gym of a morning will be knackering themselves by doing extra workout. And some people are going to be late for work, and some people's dogs are going to be saying, please, can we get off this beach? Has it finished? But our last story, Kieran, is a sterling indication of the global nature of world football. Well, of course, world football would be global, Kieran, but we're all tired, Kieran. We've all had a drink.
Yes.
We've all been here too long, but you know what I mean.
Yes, this is in respect of the chairman of Internazionale, a guy called Stephen Zhang. And he has borrowed $300 million from the China Construction Bank. And I think it's fair to say they're not very pleased with him because he's not got round to paying it back. He was appointed the chairman in 2018. His dad is the founder of Sunning Holdings, who are the owners of Internazionale. But they are in trouble due to $1.7 billion worth of loan default. So it's a company in crisis. It looks like the individual is in crisis. There's been accusations that he's been hiding his assets. So when the banks come after him, they can't find his assets. And yet you go to his Instagram page and you think, that car looks pretty decent. And the car next to it looks pretty decent. And blimey O'Reilly, he's got a third one as well. So yes, Inter have done pretty well in Syria in the past couple of years, but the owners appear here to be in a bit of a mess. And if the owners are a bit of a mess, sometimes that can flow through to the football club itself.
Yeah. Apologies to everyone that this has been a slightly longer pod than normal, but I think you'll all understand that we wanted to do the Man City story and the Morecambe story, to be fair, full justice. Thank you to everyone who's donated to the pod via our Patreon page. If you'd like to join them to make a small monthly contribution, that'd be very kind of you. Go to patreon.com/priceoffootball. If you'd like to take part in our regular Spot the Smiths lyric sweepstake, you can do the same thing. And if you have a question you'd like answered on the show, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. In the meantime, I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
Well, it's been a long evening. I know it's over. Let's just call it quits there. Thanks very much for your support, folks, and we'll see you soon.
How many Smith songs did we get up to there?
8.
8. Bye, everybody.
We are childish. That goes the BAFTA again. Bye.
The price of football. The price of football.